Every cup of coffee you have ever had begins here, in the green highlands of Ethiopia, more than 1,000 years ago. According to legend, a young goat herder named Kaldi wandered these hills, never imagining he was about to stumble onto one of the most important discoveries in human history. One afternoon, Kaldi noticed something strange. His goats, after nibbling the bright red berries of a certain shrub, began to leap and dance with wild energy, refusing to sleep. Astonished, he watched them prance about long into the evening, and his curiosity, like ours ever since, got the better of him. The plant was the coffee shrub, and the berries were coffee cherries. Inside each one sat 2 small green seeds, the very beans we now roast by the billions. But in Kaldi's time, no one knew what they were, only that the goats who ate them seemed suddenly, impossibly, awake. Kaldi carried a handful of the mysterious cherries to a nearby monastery, hoping the monks might explain their strange power. He could not have known that this one simple gift would set the little red berry on a journey that would one day circle the entire globe. But the first monk was unimpressed. Declaring the berries the work of the devil, he flung them straight into the fire. And then, as the beans began to roast in the flames, something wonderful happened. A rich, dark aroma rose up and filled the entire room. The monks raked the roasted beans from the embers, drawn in by that intoxicating smell. It is the very same aroma that pulls millions of us out of bed each morning. The scent of roasting coffee, discovered, the story goes, entirely by accident. They crushed the precious beans and steeped them in hot water, and so brewed what may have been the first cup of coffee. They drank it cautiously, and they waited, and slowly, a clear and steady wakefulness spread through them, unlike anything they had ever felt before. The monks soon found a holy use for their discovery. The drink kept them alert through long hours of midnight prayer, when the body begs for sleep. Word of the wakeful berry spread quietly from monastery to monastery, and coffee began, at last, its long march into the world. From Ethiopia, coffee crossed the narrow waters of the Red Sea into Yemen, on the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. Here, for the very first time, it would be grown not by accident, but on purpose and cultivated as a crop worth trading. It was in the Yemeni port city of Mocha that coffee first became a global commodity. Sacks of beans were loaded onto wooden ships and sent across the seas, and for a time, this single harbor gave its name to the very drink the whole world would come to crave. On the steep mountainsides of Yemen, farmers carved terraces and planted neat rows of coffee, guarding their treasure jealously. For centuries they tried to keep the living plant for themselves, exporting only roasted or boiled beans that could never be grown by anyone else. Coffee found its first great devotees among the Sufi mystics, who drank it to stay awake through long nights of chanting and prayer. To them it was almost sacred, a gift that lifted the spirit and held exhaustion at bay. They called it fondly the wine of Araby. Then coffee did something no drink had done before. It left the temple and the home, and it built a place of its own. The very first coffee houses opened in cities like Constantinople, and people gathered there to drink, to talk, and to think together. These houses quickly became the beating heart of public life. Beneath their lamps, men played chess, listened to music and stories, argued politics, and traded news. They were so lively, so full of ideas, that people began to call them the schools of the wise. Not everyone approved. Rulers grew nervous at all these gathered minds and loosened tongues, and more than once coffee was banned outright, condemned as dangerous. But every ban failed. People had tasted the drink, and the conversation that came with it, and they would give up neither. By the 17th century, coffee reached Europe, carried first into the bustling ports of Venice by merchants trading with the East. At first it was a strange and exotic novelty, dark and bitter and faintly suspicious, and Europeans did not quite know what to make of it. Some clergy distrusted it, calling it the bitter drink of unbelievers and urging that it be banned. But the story goes that the Pope himself decided to taste it first, and found it so delightful that he chose to bless it instead. And so coffee was welcomed into Europe. In England, coffee houses exploded in popularity. For the price of a single penny, the cost of one cup, anyone could enter, sit, and join the conversation. They were nicknamed penny universities because a man could learn more there in an afternoon than in a week of lectures. These humble rooms changed history. In one London coffee house, merchants and ship owners met to insure their voyages, and from those very tables grew a great insurance empire. Newspapers, stock exchanges, and scientific societies were all, in part, born over cups of coffee. Across Europe, the café became an institution. In Paris, Vienna, and Amsterdam, elegant coffee houses filled with writers, philosophers, and revolutionaries. Some historians argue that the Enlightenment itself was brewed in these rooms, fueled, sip by patient sip, by this dark and clarifying drink. But Europe wanted more than to drink coffee. It wanted to grow it. The closely guarded plant was finally smuggled out, a single seedling carried across the ocean, protected like treasure, destined to seed vast plantations in colonies far from where it began. Coffee took root in the tropics of the Americas and the Caribbean, in colonies like Brazil, where endless green rows stretched to the horizon. It became one of the most valuable crops on earth, though its riches, it must be said, were too often built on stolen labor and great suffering. Today coffee grows in a wide band around the equator known as the Coffee Belt, in Ethiopia and Yemen where it began, and in Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. From a single shrub on an Ethiopian hill, it had spread across the entire warm middle of the world. As demand soared, growing and processing coffee became a vast industry. Beans were harvested, dried and sorted by the ton, packed into great burlap sacks, and shipped to every corner of the globe to satisfy a thirst that simply would not stop. Then, in early 20th century Italy came a revolution in the cup itself. The espresso machine forced hot water through finely ground coffee under pressure, producing a small, intense shot in seconds. From this gleaming invention came the cappuccino, the latte, and modern cafe culture as we know it. In the bottomless mugs of the American diner, coffee became the everyday fuel of ordinary life, poured freely at every counter from dawn until midnight. It was no longer exotic or rare. It was simply there, faithful and familiar, the quiet companion of work and conversation. And in our own time, coffee has come full circle, back to being something savored and studied. In specialty cafés around the world, baristas treat each cup as a craft, tracing every bean to the farm and the hillside that grew it, honoring a journey thousands of years long. Think, for a moment, of everything inside your cup. A red cherry, picked by hand. A green seed, dried and roasted dark. Ground, brewed, and poured. A simple ritual repeated over 2 billion times a day, all over the planet, every single day. Coffee is now the most traded commodity on earth after oil. A single thread connecting Ethiopian farmers, Italian baristas, and sleepy commuters everywhere into one vast, invisible community, all of them joined by the same small, dark, miraculous bean. So the next time you wrap your hands around a warm cup of coffee, remember just how far it has traveled to reach you. From dancing goats on an Ethiopian hill, across oceans and centuries, into your morning. Not bad at all for a berry a goat discovered first.